oceanography, meteorology, and polar operations. Missions that take Coast Guard men and ships into the major ocean areas of the world. Oceanography is the oldest, dating back to 1857, when the cutter Lincoln was ordered to make the first exploration of Alaskan waters. In later years, the cutters Corwin and Bear brought law and order and medical help to the new territory as they probed the Gulf of Alaska and Bering Sea, obtaining information which spurred development of today's vast Alaskan fishing industry. Since 1914, cutters have prowled the North Atlantic Ocean on international ice patrol, taking temperature and current readings, sometimes within a boat-hook length of fog-shrouded icebergs, gathering oceanographic data to aid in predicting movement of the huge bergs from the fjords of Greenland into North Atlantic shipping lanes. While cutters are still used to carry out the oceanographic mission of the patrol, most of the long, tedious search operation has been taken over by Coast Guard patrol planes that, even in bad weather, using their radar, are able to scan several thousand square miles of ocean each day. Not only do they locate and report iceberg positions, but also bomb them with colored dye to help in keeping track of their movements. Since the start of the patrol over 50 years ago, not a single ship has been lost to the beautiful but deadly icebergs in the North Atlantic. Today, oceanography is one of the major efforts of the service as the tempo of undersea research quickens. Coast Guard polar icebreakers plumb depths of the Arctic and Antarctic to obtain temperature, salinity, pressure readings, and bottom samples. Oceanographic missions have taken these same icebreakers into the seas north of the Soviet Union, where observations were carried out under almost constant surveillance of Russian aircraft and naval men of war. Buoy tenders have set and tended oceanographic buoys in the frigid waters off Greenland and in tepid currents of the Caribbean. These are perhaps the forerunners of a worldwide network of buoys, which one day will collect oceanic and meteorological data. Other Coast Guard vessels, specially outfitted for undersea research, have crisscrossed large areas of the South Atlantic and Eastern Pacific Oceans, making thousands of observations. Lowering electronic devices into the seas to record temperature, salinity, and depth data that will advance the technology of undersea communications, navigation, and warfare. They have dropped Nansen bottles into ink-blue depths to collect water samples, some just below the surface, others from more than a mile down. Nets cast from cutter decks into darkened waters collect sea life. In shipboard laboratories, these sea life and water samples are processed and analyzed for mineral and nutrient content. For the seas hold a limitless supply of minerals and are an endless source of food for future generations of a hungry world. Thousands of other oceanographic observations are made by ocean station vessels on weather patrols hundreds of miles at sea. Others are made from light ships as they stand their lonely vigil. From their successors, modern offshore light structures, platforms for continuous tide, temperature, and other readings, and from automatic supersea buoys, as the Coast Guard continues its study of the restless ocean, the inner space, a vast, mysterious world whose secrets we are only beginning to discover. Just as oceanographers study this inner space, meteorologists probe the outer space. Coast Guard vessels have occupied weather stations in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans since 1940. Today, high-endurance cutters man 6 stations, 2 in the Pacific and 4 in the Atlantic. Life on ocean station cutters is often rough and monotonous, as they patrol an imaginary 10-mile square in mid-ocean. For 3 weeks at a time, they provide navigational and weather information, search and rescue and communications assistance to transoceanic ships and aircraft. Each cutter carries highly trained observers from the U.S. Weather Bureau. With assistance of the ship's crew, they carry out a program of regular meteorological observations. Temperature and humidity recordings are taken from rolling decks. Surface wind speed and direction are continually recorded by instruments mounted high on cutter yardarms. Upper air observations are obtained by balloons carrying radar reflectors and small radio instruments called radiosondes. These battery-operated instruments transmit air pressure, temperature, and humidity readings from the upper air spaces back to observers on the cutter. In the protection of the balloon shelter, limp balloons are filled with helium. When fully inflated, the gas-filled spheres are worked carefully from the shelter to the outer end of the narrow catwalk and launched on their probes of space where much of our weather is made. The balloon is tracked by shipboard radar. Its track reveals wind speed and direction. Below deck, radiosonde signals are converted to pressure, temperature, and humidity readings of the upper air currents. From this information, weather messages are compiled and transmitted at frequent intervals to the U.S. Weather Bureau. These meteorological observations provide vital information for daily and long-range weather forecasts. Coast Guard LORAN stations in isolated areas also make regular observations and reports to aid man's quest for better understanding and control of his environment. This quickening search for environmental knowledge is also sending Coast Guard icebreakers deeper and deeper into ice of the Arctic and Antarctic oceans. For these ships are man's best and often only means of penetrating farther and staying longer in the polar regions. They provide platforms and transport for scientific expeditions and research teams who probe the atmosphere, the ice packs, and the frigid undersea of these vast, unexplored regions. Polar icebreakers lead thin-skinned cargo ships through stubborn ice fields to the nation's outposts at the top and the bottom of the world. A year's supply of fuel, food, and building material must be brought in by these ships during the short summer season. To stations otherwise inaccessible, the icebreaker brings the first and sometimes the only contact with the outside world after a long polar winter. They team up with helicopters to get the station's supplies ashore. And through hoses supported by bright orange floats, pump thousands of gallons of fuel into station tanks. So the effort goes on. In polar ice packs at the top and bottom of the world, in vast undersea areas of the inner space, and in the approaches to limitless outer space. Coast Guard men and ships serve the nation and the world in the quest for more knowledge of man's total environment.